Hey, everybody. Thanks for coming to writing slash publishing. I wanted to talk a little bit about the slash between writing and publishing. And we had our little pre-game for the mentors yesterday, and we talked about very briefly how this cluster is really about two very different subjects that kind of have a confluence in careers. The first one of these things is writing, the art of communicating through mostly words, at least in this case, and publishing being the business of writing and how you might actually make a living from communicating with words. So if your goal is to have a career, you're probably going to need both of these skills, and the writing part being somewhat more of an art, the publishing side being a little more of commerce. But it's great to be a gifted and talented writer, writing in a room all by yourself. But if you would like this to be a career, you're going to need people like you see right here: editors, agents, publishers, other writers. So we're going to talk a lot about those different ways that you put together the skills of writing and publishing to go on and have a career. The other option, of course, is you could be lucky, like some famous writers have been, and manage to have other jobs that support a writing career. So I pulled a few off the internet this morning. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who wrote the Sherlock Holmes books, he was a surgeon. The novelist Kurt Vonnegut sold cars for a living when he was getting his career off the ground. And Margaret Atwood worked as a barista. So there's lots of options outside of publishing for writers, but we're going to talk about the stuff on the inside. The other thing I think that will be very helpful to all of you and should be really interesting for the mentors is what's a career trajectory look like? So you decide when you're a sophomore in college that you want to be in writing and publishing. Do you get a job right out of college and boom, your trajectory is a straight line, you move up the ladder at a corporation? Or is it a swirling cloud with zigzags where you go off and do things that you had no intention or idea that were even possible on your way to something that's a goal? So we're going to talk a little bit about our trajectories as well, so you can see, the wide variety of ways that these careers kind of come together. And I think the trajectory is often determined by how specific your goals are. So is your goal that you want to write for a living? Is your goal that you want to write fiction for a living? Is your goal that you want to help others who write or write fiction for a living? Do you just want to work around words? Do you want to be the book reviewer for the New York Times? So what those goals are going to also determine what this trajectory is. So I'm going to go on for one more minute and then turn it over to the mentors. And what I've asked them to do as by way of introduction, since you can see our bios online and we don't need to repeat all the things that are in there, I thought we'd start on a positive note in this difficult field and each name a career highlight of our own, and then maybe just a few words about the trajectory that got us to that career highlight. So I guess since I have the floor, I will start. And having been a freelance magazine journalist for many, many years, a highlight of my career was when I published my first piece in the New York Times. And that happened, probably 2 decades into my career. And that to me, even having written for a lot of very good magazines, that to me was a real sign of arrival and a very kind of emotional achievement. And so knowing that I was going to talk about the trajectory of how that happened, I went back into my mail files this morning to see how exactly did that happen. And so what I found was I had a specialty writing about golf for many years, and I had a friend who was a golf writer, and he had written for the New York Times. And so I asked him if he would share a contact if he had anybody, because I had an idea for a story. And so this was both a connection I made and also the skill of knowing how am I going to network to somebody at the Times who's going to not only answer my email in the first place, but also have the power to assign me a story. So I got a contact from my colleague who was also a golf writer, wrote a pitch letter, something that had taken many years to learn how to do well, to succinctly tell someone what my great idea was and why I was so well qualified to write this idea. And then I watched through the email chain as an editor actually paid attention to the first email and wrote back. And now I was like, wow, this is okay. Got my first step. And then I kind of, polished up this pitch. She asked a couple of questions. I had to go back and figure out, okay, what is going to be the best way to write this story, and what's going to be the best way to write this story so they publish it in the New York Times. And after a trail of about 3 months and maybe 20 or 30 emails, I took a trip. I wrote the story and it appeared in the Times, and friends from all over the country saw it. It was on the cover of the sports section. And that for me, that was, still with other things I've accomplished, that was really a hallmark for me of, wow, this is a successful career. So I'm going to kick it over to Annabelle. Why don't you tell us something great that happened to you?
Something great. Thanks, Jeff. My name is Annabelle. I'm a writer and a writing coach. And I think the success I wanted to talk about has to do with my career as a writer, which was something that happened to me as I was about to graduate with my MFA, which was I won a prize for a story. And I think that you would think that the prize was the accomplishment, and it certainly was an incredible prize. I won an award from Prada, which is a fashion line, which you wouldn't think like gave out literary prizes, but they did. And they flew me to Milan, and I got to go to a fashion show, and I got a makeover, and Ansel Elgort read my story aloud to a room full of people who didn't speak English, and it was I was like, wow, is this a teenage movie? I'm living a dream. He gave me a hug. I was like, okay, great. I went anyway. So that was great. But the real accomplishment for me is that when I finished that story, I knew I had written something great, like without anyone telling me it was good. I was like, this is great. It's going to win the contest. And I sent it in. I was like, I'm going to win. And what preempted that was a lot of rejection and kind of every other submission I sent out, in classes where teachers told me they didn't get what I was doing, friends not understanding what I was doing. And I think what I want to preempt, like maybe a longer conversation we're going to have about circuitous careers or the life of a writer, is that it's a lot of rejection. And it's not linear, this career. And actually, I'm not writing daily right now, like as a fiction writer. That I wouldn't say that's like my main career right now. And I think when you're thinking about your life as a writer right now, as a sophomore in college, and you think about the rejection you've had, like when I think of myself as a 19-year-old, there wasn't a lot of rejection I'd had. Maybe you applied to college and you didn't get into your first choice. I applied early decision, so I hadn't had a big rejection yet. My first rejection was I didn't get into narrative writing when I was at Vassar. And I had to talk to Cassie Lehman, who was the teacher of narrative at the time, and ask what happened, like what can I do better next time. So there maybe there's a lot of rejection, and I think that goes hand in hand with this career you may be thinking about. And my accomplishment, even though I had all the like trappings of success of like winning the prize, it was really knowing that I had done it without anyone telling me. So we'll talk more, I'm sure, about all the other paths, but that's what I wanted to talk about. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I think talking about rejection goes hand in hand with this career. So really well said. Let's go to Nick. You want to go next?
Sure. My name is Nick. I'm a book editor, which means that I'm often the one doing the rejecting. It's nothing personal. Terrific writers there, but a lot of writers out there. So let's see. This might be kind of cheating in terms of an accomplishment because it's not a singular thing. But I think just every time that a finished book arrives, there's something kind of magical about that, and you're going to hear it sort of from a variety of, people on the like short form journalism to long form journalism to book spectrum. But books take a really long time. So I work primarily on nonfiction books, and it might be, 3 or 4 years between getting an initial book proposal and then that final finished copy showing up that, you've put so much into, and, a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, and fights with the author, and, all sorts of things. And I think that I don't know, I find like there's something really compelling about having something that you can hold in your hand that feels real, and that makes you feel connected to what you do, especially if it's a book that you personally believe in, which hopefully all of them are. But and let's see, what was the second part of this question? My
The
career
trajectory?
Yes. So I guess I followed mostly linear. I sort of bounced around a lot my first year out of college, and then got a job at the place that I currently work at, which I've now been at for almost 7 years, which is a little scary. But did sort of a bunch of short-term things all at once that were somewhat publishing related and somewhat not. And it took me a long time to sort of find my full footing there. But then it has been linear-ish since.
Cool.
That's what I got. All right.
So let's go to Grace, who obviously had a much shorter path to the New York Times than I did.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I mean, this is so interesting. I have a little bit of a different experience than some of the other people on the panel. I work in journalism. I work on the investigations team at the New York Times. I'm a researcher and reporter. And this is sort of the story of the first big New York Times story that I did, which was looking at the affordable housing system and the ways that it was basically failing New York City and its residents. And it actually is, in a funny way, the story of my circuitous path to the place that I am right now. When I was in your shoes, when I was graduating school, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I knew that I liked to write, both creatively and also just in general. That was something that I felt like I was kind of good at. But I also knew that, I wanted a steady job. Both my parents were in the arts, and it scared the crap out of me to have a life like that. And so I was like, I want a steady job. I knew I wanted to do something that had some sort of an impact. Didn't totally know what that was. I was drawn to activism, like with a lot of Vassar students, I had kind of a keen sense of injustice. But I really wanted to kind of like engage with the world, and I didn't know what to do with all that. So I ended up, working in a law firm, specialized in like condo co-op law, which I was like, ugh, snore. But the sort of funny thing is, through the, after kind of working there for a little bit, realizing that was not what I wanted to do, I sort of was like, well, you can write and you can kind of, ask questions. I was very curious. I actually had a conversation with Matt Ortile around this time. I was like, you're in journalism, what does that look like? And, ended up going to Columbia Journalism School, where I think I ended up getting into that. The only reason I probably got in was because I had spent this 2 years doing this job that I really hated, spending all this time around documents and like learning investigative methods. And then when I was hired out of journalism school to the Times, which was crazy in and of itself. That's a totally different story. But one of the very, very first big stories that I was assigned to ended up being about housing court and this housing court system that I had surreptitiously spent the last 2 years, not the last, but I had spent like 2 years just sort of sitting in and listening to and trying to pay attention to. And I had all these questions about this system. How did it work, and who was it working for, and how is it supposed to work, and what was actually happening? Was it fair? And the big thing was, when you're working for a law firm as a lawyer, and I think in a lot of careers, you don't really have the time to ask questions like that, and to kind of wonder, like, could this be better? But as a journalist, you do. And that's the sort of great, great, great gift. I'm so grateful to be able to work in journalism, especially in investigative journalism, where they give us a little more time than other people. Because we get to spend the time to understand really complicated things, and then explain it to people, so that we can try to answer some of those big questions. So yeah, so we ended up, my very first big story was, or sort of my very first big story that I did from the beginning, was looking at the housing court system and the way that there was a sort of backroad system of incentives that kind of allowed big landlords and developers to exploit the problems in the housing court to push people out of their apartments and push apartments out of rent stabilization. And it was a really big story. It was actually on the front page, which was thrilling. And it sort of just gave me this, kind of curiosity and a bit of confidence to keep asking those questions. And yeah.
Super. Kayla, you want to go next?
Sure. Sorry. Hi, everybody. My name is Kayla. I'm class of 18. I am an assistant and agent at Aisha Pandey Literary, which is a boutique agency based out of Harlem. Some of our clients include Ibram X. Kendi, Daniel Evans, Lisa Ko, wonderful roster of authors. And I think for me, a career highlight would be the phone call I got to have with my author, who also turned out to be my first client, where I got to tell her that multiple publishers wanted her book, and this being after an initial round of all passes. And so the first time we went out with it, no one wanted it. We tweaked it. The second time we went out with it, we had an auction. And so really being able to, especially after that first rough phone call of like, I'm so sorry, no one wanted it this first time around. And then, really kind of being the cheerleader for this book, even when the author was like, maybe this just isn't it. Maybe this is a dud. And I'm like, no, there's like people there are readers out there who need this book. And so being able to come back to her and deliver that really happy news the second time around, I think was amazing. And I think it also hits on a lot of what we're talking about as writing as a career, as opposed to an art form. And so as an agent, also realizing the ramifications of writing, if you can write for your job. And so this author being like, Kayla, I can put a down payment for a house off of this payment. And so it really just like resonated me like, wow, I can I can make a difference in a writer's life in that way, and being their advocate, and supporting their books, even when we get those inescapable rejections, as we're all kind of talking about. In terms of trajectory, my trajectory was pretty streamlined, but I was also super nervous about the linearness of it. And so what I mean by that is, like I said, I'm class of 18. And so I actually was in the inaugural sophomore career connection. So I was where you guys were, how many years ago? But I remember sitting in the writing publishing panel. And at that time, actually, I was there under the impression that I wanted to work in journalism. And so, I also, like everybody here, enjoyed writing. And thought, okay, so then that means I have to have a career that centers just my writing. And so once I did a couple of internships in journalism and found out that I hated it, I was very stressed. I was like, oh, what do I do? And kind of stumbled into working at a literary agency. I knew I didn't want to work in editorial. And it was there that I kind of realized two things can be true. And so you can love writing, you can also love working with writers. And so that's something I hope we talk about as we talk about, all these writers who had day jobs outside of publishing. There are writers that have day jobs in publishing. And I think if anything, it can be a very kind of harmonious, relationship. And so I see Matt raising his hand. And so I'm sure you'll speak a little bit more clearly to that than I can. But yeah, and so I first interned at a literary agency, and I may be a little bit biased, but I think agencies are the best place to learn what you want to do in publishing, whether or not it's actually agenting, just because you deal with so many different facets of publishing and managing an author's career, and so you deal with editorial, but you also deal with, publicity, you deal with foreign co-agents, you deal with film agents, like you really kind of have your finger on the pulse in these various facets of the publishing world. And so it was there that I started working, and I was like, I'm here, I have a job, but I don't really know if I want to do agenting. And so again, kind of being freaked out by the linearness of my trajectory. And I think this is going to really fit into what you guys hear a lot this weekend of you don't have to have everything figured out. And so you can be in a job and still be like, oh, maybe this isn't what I want to do. You don't have to know right off the bat, okay, I'm here, I'm going to be an agent for the rest of my existence on earth. So, you know, in working my way up, I was like, okay, you know, let me just try it and see if I like representing authors. And it turned out that was absolutely my jam. And so in that case, I was like, okay, so I think I'm where I want to be right now. And yeah, and started taking on clients and was able to sell my first book at auction. And, you know, and again, the ramifications that has on a writer's life is an amazing feeling.
Can you tell us what the book was?
I can't because the deal has not been announced yet.
Oh, okay.
Because we'll all go out and buy it.
I'm laughing because I can tell you the title. It's called An Anthology of Assholes. And so, you know what, Jeff, that might be your book. But yes, please, when the deal is announced and then it's on shelves, you know, 2 years from now in 2023, please go buy it.
Congratulations. That's
Yeah.
me.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right, Matt, you want to bring it home?
Yeah, happily. But really quickly, Kayla, are you taking clients?
I mean, come talk to me after you know, let's talk, okay?
You're gonna hear from all the other panelists.
Please, oh my God, please.
That
hit me up.
option of like down payment. Hi, gang. I'm Matt. I'm class of 14, same as Grace. And I guess I'll talk first about my trajectory. So similar to Kayla, I've had it pretty linear. While I was at school, the summer after my sophomore year, my first sort of exploration was in magazines, sort of the glossies. So I was at Condé Nast the summer after my sophomore year at Details, a men's magazine, RIP. And then I took on a fall semester internship. I commuted my junior year in the fall from Vassar to the city. I was at Hearst that time, Town and Country, the magazine for the 1%. Realized that those two, working at Glossies was kind of like, okay, maybe not. And then I pivoted a little bit towards digital media. Specifically, I went to BuzzFeed the summer after my junior year. And that was really fun. I really had a good time there. And I was in a fellowship and they were hiring people out of that fellowship. And when they said, do you want a job? I was like, no. I'm finishing senior year at Vassar. Please call me in the spring. And then they did, which was very nice. And they created a role for me since they wanted me back. And so I started my job 2 days after graduation. And that was really kind of intimidating. I was a little scared, like, am I kind of locking myself in too soon? But what was nice about being at BuzzFeed, a place that did so many different things at the time, it was kind of like a golden era of 2014 to 2016. We really could just throw spaghetti or bucatini at the wall. If you have bucatini, there's a shortage. Just throw bucatini at the wall and see what sticks. And I was doing more operational stuff. Like I was sort of a glorified assistant, but my first 2 years I was doing that. I also had time to sort of explore and see what they needed. And I think this is one of the big lessons that I can share with you is that if you can just pinpoint sort of gaps in coverage or gaps in work systems or things that they're not doing, but they would like to do, and someone just hasn't taken up that project yet, you can volunteer for that if you have the time. And so for me, that looked like saying, oh, we're doing a lot of international expansion into Japan, Canada. I said, I can talk to the Philippine, diaspora, the Philippine diaspora, and that audience, both in the Philippines and in the States, and more globally, since we're everywhere. So I launched BuzzFeed Philippines, I think 2 months after I started my job, and I did that for all of my 4 years as an extracurricular activity while I did other things, which was really nice. And after 4 years at BuzzFeed, I kind of hit my ceiling. I was kind of like, that's my grad school. I've learned a lot. It's time for me to move on. And so I used the skills that I developed as the editor of BuzzFeed Philippines to pivot into sort of a hybrid media publishing space. So you see in my bio, I'm the managing editor of Catapult Magazine. It's a small literary magazine, which is also a part of an indie book publisher. And so there, when I applied for the job, I said, look, all of my full-time experience, don't look at that. Look at my extracurricular activity that I did at BuzzFeed. I was an editor. I commissioned pieces from writers. I worked with freelancers, handled budgets, essentially did everything to make the trains run on time for a sort of sub-publication within a larger website. And so my boss hired me out of that using those skills. And so I kind of did a diagonal move into this managing editor role where I do kind of run the daily operations of the magazine. And so I've been there for, in this summer, it'll be 3 years. And so it's been really cool to have the flexibility of this kind of job that dealt with media, dealt with publications, dealt with words, while I've also, which is my highlight, I published my first book last year in the summer. It was really tough. Thank you very much. It was tough. I mean, Jeff, you know, the pandemic was not great for authors. Kayla, you know. And so it's actually right here. If you want to, if there's a great chapter in it about Vassar, if you want to buy it.
Can
So.
you show us the cover? Can we
Oh,
get
yeah, here.
on the cover?
So it's called The Groom Will Keep His Name. And it's actually, there's a little illustration of me in a barong Tagalog, which is like the traditional Filipino, like formal wear. And so I kind of mentioned this too, because this book and BuzzFeed Philippines and these kind of major career highlights would not have happened if I didn't lean into my identity as a person of color, as an immigrant, as a queer person, all of those intersections at once. And so I think that's something that you can take away too. And I think you guys now more than ever are so aware, I think, and so cognizant of who you are and who you're growing into and the changes that you're kind of experiencing as a young adult in the world, especially this wild world right now, that these things that I think very often that can make you feel like an outsider in a lot of very white, very male, very cis spaces, particularly writing and publishing. These are the things that make your story, if you want to tell stories, right? Make your story really special and really important that you share. And at the same time, if you want to work with authors or other storytellers to tell their story, these kinds of experiences of yours, these experiences of difference are also what help you develop that muscle for empathy. And having that, exercising that empathy is honestly the biggest tool that you can have when you're helping other people and collaborating with others, especially in this industry and really anywhere. But yeah, so those are my career highlights, and we're really excited to get to know you guys as well very soon.
You guys are awesome. So I have like 5 different directions I want to go in right now. The first thing I want to say is if any of the students have either specific questions or even just kind of more general subject areas that you want us to cover, I'm sure we can all talk about pretty much anything you throw in front of us. So put that in the chat or raise your hand, and until I see some questions, I'm going to just run with a couple of things that have been said and you know, kind of riff off them and see where we go, and if people have something else to say on that subject. But I wanted to go back for a second, Matt, to what you were saying. You know, I think this idea of like how you took your gender and your ethnicity and made those strengths, and you know, I think it takes a very strong person in a lot of these career fields to know who you are and what you stand for, and I think that is a great thing. And it brought up for me something, even as the token middle-aged white guy, when I got out of school and I thought, you know, I needed to be a certain type of person. I wanted to live in New York. I got a job at a literary agency, and I knew maybe after 3 hours at the job that this was not for me, right? But all of my friends who were, you know, already in medical school or at law firms, and, you know, people, I would go out for a drink and I would say, I don't think this is for me. And they would all go, oh, well, you've been there for 3 days. You know, you can't know that. You got to stay at a job for a year. And so it took me about another 3 days to go, no, I don't. I know, first of all, I'm probably not cut out for working for other people. I don't play well with others, probably my kindergarten report card said. And, you know, it was like, Matt, what you were talking about, you know something about yourself, and sometimes it's very hard to be true to something you know about yourself when you're young and impressionable, and lots of more experienced people are giving you advice that maybe is contrary to what you already know about yourself. So I stayed at that job for, I think, 6 weeks. That was the last job that I had, and that was in 1985. And I just knew, you know, I knew after 3 days, this is not for me. I got to go find another path. I don't know if other of you have had similar experiences like that.
Yeah, I think that also speaks to another, I think, kind of revelation I had in freshly graduating from Vassar, is that you are going to get all sorts of advice coming from people who are well-meaning, and so the six of us up here are fall in that category as well. But you also know yourself, and you shouldn't feel that because the person giving you the advice is, a literary agent at an agency, or, a managing editor at Catapult, or, New York Times, like, it's okay to to center what you want in your own experiences in contradiction to this wise advice that you're getting from us. And so all that to say, like, I remember when I was doing this, I was so afraid of, like, what if I'm making the wrong decision? What if I'm making the wrong decision? There is no wrong decision. It's ultimately what I'm rambling to say. Yeah.
It's the beauty of, I think, this particular practice, this kind of trade that we're in. Like, I can imagine all of us getting multiple kinds of feedback in a lot of different directions, whether it's on a project or the thing that we're doing, whatever that is. And, a story at the investigations desk could go one way or another based on someone's input. Or like an agency might, try to market a book in a certain way, or, any author or editor might try to position a book in a certain way. But it's one of these industries where that pushback actually is so valuable. Like, one of the biggest things I think that we all had to learn maybe was kind of learning to say, okay, no, hold on. Let me try to challenge what you're telling me. And honestly, that friction can be so productive, I think, in this space. And honestly, that's kind of what we learned to do at Vassar, where it's like, you're not always just like, to piggyback off of that point, like when you didn't do the reading, but like when you did do the reading and you're like really engaged and you're like, no. I don't agree. How about this reading of the thing? And so that kind of liberal arts education really does prep you for this kind of work.
The other thing that kind of jumps to my mind in that anecdote you told, Jeff, was all your friends in different things telling you, like, oh, you don't know, like it's been too long. I think there's also, and a lot of people don't talk about this is just a theory, but I think a lot of people hate their jobs. Like they just, and that just feels normal to them. Like, maybe they get some satisfaction of it. They certainly, they like the prestige, they like the money, they like, they like certain aspects of it, but like by and large, they find that like work is a slog. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like, I think that's a very universal experience, and certainly writing and reporting and, all work is hard. And you don't do this type of work if you're not looking to work hard, and but you also don't do this work if you don't get something else out of it, which is like, I have to do this. Like, this is the thing that I have to do, And and that is, this is a conversation that I have kind of like constantly, because I'm fascinated by it. Like, and I think this is a really, really personal question. What do you want out of your life? Like, do you want your work to be who you are? Do you want your work to be something that sustains you and helps you build a life that allows you to explore other things and other people and support other people and, have adventures? And there's no one way to do it. I think it's a very, very personal answer, but this type of work does kind of consume you, and you have to really put yourself into it. And so trying to answer that question, I think, is also valuable. And maybe don't have it now, and maybe it's, maybe it keeps changing. I would kind of turn to the older people on this panel as well to hear their input on that, but that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, it's a good thing about the industry. You're not going to make enough money that you'll hate your job. So
That's a good point. I think, like, going off what everyone was saying and those questions that you brought up, Grace, too, which is like, why am I doing what I'm doing? Something that I thought about, like, I had a lot of random jobs before I went to grad school, not just one thing, and then decided to switch. But like Jeff, I found I didn't really like working for other people. But I put this in my bio, but my advice, like, the 2 things that were difficult for me switching, like thinking back to like being in school and then being in life, which was like, I don't know, you're all here volunteering for Career Connections. So I'm assuming you're good students. But I was like the student who wanted to do well. So like switching from school mentality, which is
Oh.
like, I'm doing this to get a good grade,
Ooh.
versus like a work mentality, which is like, there are no grades. Like
Mm.
you're doing it for yourself. You're doing it because you want to do the thing, or you want to be a writer because you're doing it for another person's voice or words, or that's like such a big shift.
Mhm.
But I had like a couple things on that, but the two things, like, even if you have a crappy job for a writer, everything is material. So that's always good. And then the second thing for me that like Matt was saying, like Vassar already teaches you this stuff. What's the only subject at Vassar that doesn't give you grades?
Mhm.
English?
Yeah, you don't get grades in your papers. Is that still a thing?
Graham certainly gave me a B at some point.
I've got
Oh, yeah, like,
there are no grades on your English papers. You don't
where
get
did this
grades.
shit
Oh, on
happen?
the papers themselves, right? Right.
There's no grades. I mean, you get a grade at the end of the year, but there's
Right.
no grades in your
Mm.
papers. Like your work is not graded. It is all about your individual pursuit. So like if you're pursuing, I only know this because I've taught writing several times and I kept this with me, which is like your job as a writer is to pursue the best written word you can. So like Vassar is already training you to be a writer in some form, which is like, it does not matter about doing well for the teacher. It is matters to do well for yourself. And it's kind of like a catch-22 because you get a grade at the end of the semester. So like that's something I've always taken with me, which is like, my job is to write my best words, period. Like I am doing this for the pursuit of the best sentence I can ever do. So like I always try to keep that with me. I was just trying to sew up a lot of things, but
So that gives me a great segue. And I don't want to interrupt you if you're still on a roll.
no.
Okay. So what I found was, we talked a little bit earlier about the skill of crafting language and some of the other skills involved. And so, I had very supportive professors and fellow students in senior comp and, all through my writing classes. And then I did an MFA program where nobody was really allowed even to talk about publishing work. And I spent 2 more years there, and then I got out and I was all ready to be a writer. And I'm like, okay, now what? So I felt like, although I could not have been happier with my education and the way I learned to think, I came out of 6 years of school without the actual skills to pursue my career. So by all measures, I was a decent writer, but now what do I do with that? And so I realized over the course of my career, I had to become all of the things that I never wanted to be. And I needed the skills from all of the classes that I managed to avoid by taking all English and psychology and history and humanities. And that was, I needed to learn about business. I needed to learn sales. I had to become an accountant. As a freelancer, you're an entrepreneur. As a book writer, you have to become a marketing expert. To be a journalist, you have to learn, the research skills of a scientist. So I wanted to ask everybody, what were some of the things maybe that you wish that you had learned better while you were in school that you realized later that you needed that maybe you didn't have?
Literally, accounting is the one class I tried to take every semester, and it's the class I regret not taking. Accounting 101. They still offer that, right? I'm pretty sure they do. Take it. If I'm like Jeff said the same thing. You have, if you, that is please take that class. I recommend it highly. So serious. But that was a really good recap because I feel the same way as someone who has their own business right now. I feel like I've synthesized a lot of the skills, like from my film background. I worked in publicity and marketing. I use those skills to promote myself and my business, and the commercial nature of working in film to write projects that do have appeal. I use my literary teaching skills from my MFA to help my students as a teacher in previous jobs. So yeah, take advantage of that. Vassar gives you chance to learn across disciplines. And even if you would never take economics or a finance class, it really does help. I know that sounds like the most maybe not exciting one, but I recommend it.
I don't know. This I feel like is kind of an answer to your question, but I think it's also looping in some other talking points. And so, in Jeff and you mentioning, coming out of your MFA program and suddenly confronted with the question of, oh, but the business of writing, I think it also speaks to something that I actually kind of love about our industry. Is so much is learned through doing as opposed to through a certificate or a degree of some. So publishing is one of those the few industries where you don't need a master's to, or you don't need a specific degree to work a specific job in publishing. And so there is no degree, especially for agenting. There are courses you can take. So there's the Columbia publishing course. There's the publishing course at CCNY. Those exist. I might be opening a can of worms in talking about it. They aren't, in my opinion, always necessary for a job in publishing, especially for things like the Columbia publishing course that can be uber expensive. Especially on the agenting side, there is so much that you can only learn. It really is like an apprenticeship, and that's such an I can't say it, an old way of thinking about it. But so much is learned on the job, working under somebody once you're put in the situation of, okay, this has happened, what do I do? And I think if anything, the one skill, it's not even a skill that I didn't learn at Vassar that I wish I had learned, but actually something that I picked up at Vassar was the ability to think critically and to ask questions and be curious. And so I think one of my favorite things about working in this industry is no one's ever going to look at you sideways if you're like, what does that mean? How do you do we are by nature in an industry that is constantly changing and evolving and growing with new mediums, with new technologies. There's always going to be a situation where you don't quite understand what's going on and you have to figure it out. And so no one's ever going to expect you to have all the answers usually. And so leaning into that curiosity, that fearlessness when it comes to asking questions, that's something, if anything, I was really grateful for when I first started interning at the agency that I eventually worked for. My boss hated interns that were quiet, and I have other thoughts about that. But she would get really irritated. Which is like, you guys can talk. You guys can we loop you in on these meetings to hear what you have to say. And it took me a long time to realize, like, oh, my opinion matters. Or not that my opinion matters, but like, this is a situation where, again, it's not gonna be a strike against me for not knowing something. And that's the case even now. That's the case with more senior agents that I work with who've been in the industry now as long as I've been alive, who are like, oh yeah, I have no clue how to do that, but we're gonna figure it out. And so really kind of keeping that in mind as you start to look for careers in publishing. If anything, people are gonna be impressed that you, again, are so curious and open to being like, let's figure out how this works.
Yeah. I want to just say two quick things to piggyback on that. One, so coming out of school with an MFA, and by the way, I would not recommend an MFA for anybody who wants to be a writer. Although Annabelle and I had a discussion about this last year, which we could take up again later. My program in particular was not helpful to me at all. But like you talked about the skill of questioning and knowing the right things and being a critical thinker. So my answer to what do I do now was I became a journalist, even though I had never done anything in journalism, and I succeeded at it because I could go talk to people and ask the right questions because I was curious. I remember I did some work for Discover magazine, which was a science publication, and I was sent to a conference where I was to interview 6 Nobel Prize winning scientists whose areas of expertise I knew nothing about because I never took a science class. But just being curious and interested, and going from the perspective of, well, I'm going to write for an audience that is not Nobel Prize winning scientists. I can ask simple questions in a respectful manner. And that was very helpful. And that's how I went from being a fiction writer to a journalist for 35 years, just by having those skills that I did learn at school. Anyway. Sorry.
Yeah, I think it can be an asset on the editorial side too. I mean, I work with a lot a lot of scientists and academics in fields that I'm not at all well versed in. And, you know, you can, like, you don't need to be. You can, because I figure, like, you know, if I don't understand something that you're writing, then probably many of the people reading the book aren't going to either, because, you know, you can't assume deep scientific background on them, and that it can almost be sort of an asset that you can see, because, you know, these Nobel Prize winning people get so deep in their little niches of their subjects that they're often not even aware of their own blind spots and like what is not going to be obvious to the common folk like us. And there's something valuable about being ignorant enough to be able to help them find those blind spots, if that makes sense.
Anybody else on that? Anyone out there in student land have a subject you'd like to hear us cover or a question? You could raise your hand. You could put it in the chat.
If we,
Or,
yeah, Jeff, because you started talking about MFAs,
Yeah.
and so I don't know if we're looking for a direction to pivot. That I think seems as good as any. And if you want to take it off, go for it. I can speak to it from an author representation standpoint.
yeah, you go ahead.
Yeah, like I always like to give the disclaimer: are not required to have an MFA to be a published author. A lot of times, authors will ask, "Well, does that hold sway when agents are considering taking someone on?" And I don't think it does, because you can, I think it also it speaks to the larger question of, should I do an MFA? And the answer to that question being, well, it depends on what are you looking for? What are you hoping to get out of an MFA program? Like, are you looking for community? Are you looking for accountability as you're working, on this larger project? And people who've actually done MFA can like take it from here and speak far more than I ever could, but it's something to consider.
Yeah, Matt, go ahead.
Just, I'd like to ask the students, are any of you guys curious? So who has heard of an MFA and is actually thinking about it? If you would like to, there you go. That's so, okay.
Okay.
Kind of very questioning. I mean, what's the one sentence explanation of what an MFA is?
It's a master's in fine arts in creative writing. So it's basically a 2-year writing workshop where professors, I'm going to be a little cynical here, so advance trigger warning there, where professors who are writers who are not successful enough to make their career as writers teach instead, and you're put in with a group of students who will spend the next 2 years trying to beat the life out of you. That's
So MFA is not right for every person. And I'm speaking also of someone who did not have a great MFA experience. And an MFA is not, is a decision that I don't think every writer should take lightly. I think there's lots of problems in the MFA. I think I'm hoping they're starting to be addressed. I went to Texas State University that no one probably has ever heard of. But I think if you can go spend 2 to 3 years, mine was 3 years, where someone's going to pay you to write, you should freaking do it. So my thing is like an MFA equals time to get better at your craft, right? And I think Jeff is right that you can graduate your MFA and have no clue how to make money or how to do your craft. I think knowing about the industry depends on the kind of person you are. I was the kind of person who always knew I wanted to make money being a writer. My goal when we went around the room and said, what kind of writing do you want to do with my peers? I was like, I want to write an airport novel. So like, that was me. I was like, I want to have someone walk into an airport, see my book, read it on the plane, and then be like, wow, I read that book. And then maybe forget about it, maybe not, but have a good time. And I ghost wrote 2 novels. They were in airports. So I check. Cannot tell you what they were because I signed a contract. So, but everybody has a different goal. My goal was not the same as other people in my program. That created friction in the fiction I was writing. People didn't get it. People thought I wasn't literary at times, but you have to really be confident in the kind of work you're doing and what you want out of your program. And taking time off, I didn't go straight to grad school, really helped me be sure of what I wanted. And I applied a couple times and I applied to a lot of schools and I was ready to go when I was ready to go. And I was like, give me my money, give me my time. I'm ready to make it work. So it's definitely not right for everybody. What I do now is I help students, college students, grad students, doctors writing residency narratives. I help them write application statements and I help them think about some writers too apply to grad school. So if you're interested in that, I'm happy to talk more. It's certainly not right for every student. Not every program does right by their students. So so I agree with that. And Kayla, I'm sure you work with writers who've had good experiences and bad experiences, and Matt too. So yeah. And Nick too, probably. You're writers too. So
It raised, and it's one that is in hearing you talk, Annabelle, that is one thing I wished while at Vassar, especially taking like the creative writing seminars,
had no help.
that but also that we read a little bit more widely, and so it was all the work we did was very much situated in the literary space. And so upon graduating, I had a very like kind of rigid understanding of what quality writing was, and it was confined solely to literary writing. And it wasn't until I got to working in an agency where I read I remember I read a stupid romance novel, but I was in tears over it.
Oh my God, wait, what romance novel? Because we'll talk about it later.
We'll talk about it later. But like where you can pick up on, and if we're talking about writing as craft, I know that's kind of the two poles, writing as craft, writing as business. There is so much you can learn from genre writing. And so character development, romance authors have that on lock. World building, SFF writers, science fiction fantasy writers are just crazy. And so it was like kind of like this re-educating myself about not what's good writing, but what's good storytelling. And that isn't confined to a specific genre. And so one thing I know it's hard because you guys are reading, you're like, okay, great, Kayla, when am I gonna have time to read? I got other stuff to do. And so I totally understand that. But when you do have time, don't think you have to hone in on just these uber literary works. Being an omnivorous reader. Yeah.
I mean, I just like jump off of that too. Like in senior comp in my year, I think half of us applied for MFA programs, and it would seem to be the expectation, because that was, I mean, partially because of the person who led it, and I love him, great professor, but like he leaned so much about that. Like he loved his MFA, so he encouraged folks to do MFAs, and so like again, opening those kinds of avenues for you is really important. Like being aware that what Vassar can package for you, like as great as it is, like it's not the only option out there. And just to double down on what Kayla mentioned, like because we come from Vassar and because we kind of study in this very academic setup, a lot of the literary or like looking at the canon can feel really constricting. Ultimately, you graduate and you actually have such a narrow scope of what writing looks like in the real world. And so like lean into, like as Kayla said, like reading beyond what you're assigned. It's so important, I think, to just sort of dismantle that idea of what like good literature is. Sorry, go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, no, I was going to follow up on that. I mean, I think I'm a little facetious in talking about the program that I was in, but I think I can only talk about my own experience. And I went right from Vassar to my MFA program. And I was what, 21 years old. Most of the other students in my group were 27, 28. So my advice, if an MFA program seems like it's going to be the right thing, would be to get out and have some life experience in between the two. Because when I got to grad school, I didn't really, in terms of life experience, have very much to write about. I mean, sure, anybody can draw on their experiences in childhood or what they viewed of the world, but I hadn't worked in the world. I hadn't lived anywhere. I hadn't earned a living for myself. And so I think my program might have proved much more valuable if I had done something else in between. But all I knew how to do when I graduated was go to school, and I was pretty good at it. And I thought, I'll do that for another 2 years, when really the best thing for me would have been to go grind it out at something else and maybe do the MFA program a couple years later.
I mean, Grace said something similar, which is like, because I had this experience that let me take my knowledge and skills to graduate school, it made it more meaningful. So there's different paths for everyone, but we had this talk on Thursday night, which is my takeaway was like, oh, my career is going to be 60 years long and I'm going to adapt and change many times. But if I think personally, like when I teach a lot of students, high school students, and when I advocate for, I started a creative writing program at a boarding school, and my whole pitch to like why we should teach creative writing to high schoolers is that creative writing teaches you how to be a flexible, adaptable thinker, right? Liberal arts teaches you to do that. So the whole point is that if you can, every experience you do, if you can take those skills and like learn how to mutant them to other businesses, careers, fields, skill sets, whatever, you're gonna do your job and do yourself justice for whatever you do. So even if it's not the best experience, even if MFA wasn't your best experience, Jeff, you still got skills that you bring for the rest of your life. Or even if like the law wasn't for you, Grace, like it still helped you later on. Or even if BuzzFeed didn't end up being for you, et cetera, et cetera. So Nick and Kayla, sorry, you guys have been, I didn't know your previous experience, but I had so many crappy, terrible things, but I can write about them now. And I will get vengeance on everyone who ever knows. We can talk about the Hollywood industry later, but yeah.
So I see no questions. I see no raised hands.
There's one.
One raise hand?
One raised hand.
Do you see a question?
No,
From Eleanor.
I have a question.
Oh, there we go. Hi, Eleanor.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. This is so interesting to hear you all talk about your careers. And I'm wondering, so some of you are in journalism and some of you are more on the literary side, and some of you seem to be in both. And those seem to me like very different things. And I'm just interested if you could talk about like the differences and similarities and how they fit together in your lives.
I would say speed is one difference. Like I've kind of been in, and Jeff too, like you were working in magazine journalism as well. Like, and Grace alluded to this earlier, like speed varies so much. Like I remember at BuzzFeed, like my turnaround time for pieces that I was working with writers on, could be a day. But like now where I work at Catapult, it's currently the end of January. I'm scheduling for April. Like I work that far ahead, like 3 months. Grace, how long would you say you have on like a story?
So, I mean, this is like by far not representative. I mean, we work on stories for like 9 months a year, like a really long time, but that's like so, yeah, not representative. But I have had some experience doing projects with different turnaround times, and actually like it's kind of fun to do something really quick. Like you get kind of a rush, not like 2 hours quick, but like turn something around in a day. Like you go, you see it, you think about it, you process it, you deliver something, and then like it's in the newspaper. That's certainly, but it's also I think just like a pretty different process. Writing fiction is very sort of personal and internal, whereas it's a lot more collaborative to work in journalism, both in terms of the actual substance of what you're doing. You're calling people, you're reading things, you're trying to speak to as many people as possible, you're talking to your editor, you're talking to other reporters, and so if you like that kind of like teamwork, it's just like a really different energy level. That's in my experience.
Yeah.
And Nick, I'm sure you can speak to this on the house side of it's a slow burn, baby.
Yeah. I mean, I was just thinking, I had a book that came out in November that we bought in 2014. Mm-hmm. So that gives you, and like that's not exactly normal, but like I'm buying books now that will come out in 2023, 2024, which I think is especially weird as a young person, because you're like especially when I was 23 years old, like I couldn't even envision being alive in 3 years. And it gets a little less strange as I get older, I guess. But you just sort of dive in, I imagine it's the same way with you, Kayla, where you're trying to build up careers for authors over a course of decades. Like and so an author's agent is that's their person, more than their editor. So
Yeah, no, it for on our side, you could work on a novel on the or work, I guess, in the developmental editing phase, getting it up to snuff to send to an editor like Nick for 2, 3 years. Yeah, and it's funny, in Matt, you talking about speed, because I think that is a kind of such a succinct articulation of the differences in either working with journalists or working with agents who are working with journalists. That is always like the big like they always get nervous. They're like, why is it taking so long? And it's like, my dude, we got to work on this proposal first, and it's gonna be a while. They're just not used to that because they're used to turning out articles in a day. So they're like, we have to work on this proposal for 9 months? Like, yes.
It was a really shock to the system when I went out to market with my proposal. I went out to market about March 2018, and then I sold August 2018.
Mhm.
About, I guess that's 5-ish months.
Oh, that's
And
fast.
at sort of unpacking that with my agent, I was like, God, that took such a long time. He was like, you were
No.
one of the fastest people I've
Ever.
like, and it was just like bonkers to me because that was also the year I switched from media, from BuzzFeed to Catapult Literary. And it was so mind-boggling to me. But it's interesting, you kind of work at different kind of levels of depth in the thing. Like, obviously, the more time you have, like investigations, right? Like, you'll need time to call so many different things, fact check, just a lot of background calls, and with novels, obviously, and like nonfiction things. But then at the same time, as Grace mentioned, like the quick things, the quick hits are really fun because, especially now more than ever, we have the internet, and we're all consuming everything through screens, obviously, because of the pandemic. And so you kind of get immediate gratification on the thing. And so I think one thing that I would recommend for like folks thinking about like what kind of work they might want to enter, if you were like a staff writer at Teen Vogue, like you're probably publishing 2 pieces a day, and you immediately get the kind of feedback from readers or the feedback on social media, and you get to do that, every day, every week. But when you work on longer term things, like whether it's a book or a longer magazine feature of 4,000, 5,000, 10,000 words, like that takes ages, and sometimes you're working alone a lot. So there's a lot of different variations into the kind of sectors of all of it, but they're so connected. And ultimately it gets down to like, how do you want to work? How do you want to collaborate? How much time do you want to spend on something? And again, the beauty of it is that you can do one thing one year and then one thing another year. That's the really, really cool thing about this industry. If you have an interest in one thing, like, great, I'm really into wine right now, I want to edit wine stories or read a book about wine. But the next time it's about cheese, which is not that big a jump, but something I'm experiencing right now.
I think that brings up another good question that I would love to hear the younger mentors talk about, which is, changes in the industry itself. Because so I did a lot of short deadline stuff earlier in my career when I was working for magazines and newspapers. And, like Grace said, very, very satisfying to write a piece and see it come out. And at the opposite extreme, now I sold my first novel as a 60-year-old, where I don't have a career stretching out ahead of me another, 5 decades. And so I found a publisher for the novel who read the novel in November and promised that he could publish it in April. No agent. I spent a lot of time looking for an agent. I didn't find one. I know that process would have taken quite a while. Once that agent found a publisher, that publisher would have put the book out, 2 or 3 years later. So instead of it coming out when I was 60, I might have been 63. And at this point in my life, I would rather spend the 3 years writing the book and have it come out fast with a smaller publisher than have a big publisher maybe take 3 years and not necessarily market it, promote it, or sell it any better than a smaller publisher. So I'm wondering if others of you looking ahead to what the industry looks like and where it's going, some of those kinds of trends. I think we will start to see things happen faster in certain areas. But What are your thoughts?
And maybe we can just explain what the difference between a big house and an indie publisher is, and like
Sure, thank you.
timetables for people maybe who don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, you want to go ahead, Annabelle?
Oh, no, this is not my job. Come on.
Nick and Kayla.
Yeah.
I was thinking Nick and Matt, but we can the three of us.
I can talk on the indie books publisher side, and Nick, and you can talk about
Represent the behemoth.
And then I guess I can do like alternatives, sources of publication, like audio originals and whatnot. But nose goes, I'm not going first. So.
All right. Let's see. Yeah. So big publisher. Right. So there are presently 5, soon to be 4 very large U.S. publishers, which is Penguin Random House, HarperCollins, which is where I work, Simon & Schuster, which is about to become part of Penguin Random House, Hachette, and Macmillan. And so those are like, large multinational corporations, thousands of employees, hundreds of millions or billions of dollars in revenue. Like, they're corporate places. And they do have, they're all sort of subdivided into smaller units, so which in the publishing industry is called imprints. And so depending on where you work, as the industry is consolidated, you get all these sort of little smaller places that may have a very different feel, even though they're under the same publishing house. But it is very much it moves slowly in the same way that that many big companies do, which I think is partly what Jeff was alluding to. That there's, if I want to buy a book, there's a lot of people that I have to get on board, and then it takes there are a lot of people whose hands it touches, and it takes a long time for it to happen unless there's a compelling, current events related reason that it has to happen right now. And so things move slowly, which I kind of like. I think it is very much a personality driven thing. Like, I could never go and write a new story every day. It's just not who I am. Like, I like to be able to chew on things and think about them and think about how to position a book as it evolves and, grow a relationship with the author. But it's different, I imagine, than a place like Catapult.
Yeah. And I think one big difference too, like if you're someone who's hoping to write a book at some point, like when you're considering all of your publisher, your many, invitations to publish with different publishers, advances, essentially the money that you get for your book can vary widely between, even at imprints, as Nick said, at a big house, can, look very different. Like, yeah. And
$20,000 to $5 million.
Oh, very, yeah. And a place like Catapult or other small indie publishers, such as, like a Grey Wolf or an Algonquin, they're much smaller. The nice word that we like to use would be like a boutique experience, right, Kayla? A boutique, like you're kind of getting closer attention. So for scale, like Nick mentions, 1,000 people at, HarperCollins or more. Catapult has 50 people, and maybe only 40 of those people work directly with books, whether they're editors who are looking at books, the production staff who like actually put together the physical copy, a design team of like 3, one person who manages the freelance copy editors. And so to Nick's point, it can feel a little bit faster in the sense that, there's fewer people to get on board to buy a book. Granted, because indies vary, for us, our kind of advances will be slightly smaller, still competitive, but really not as, we're not throwing out 6-figure advances every day. But what we do is because indies, we kind of position ourselves as kind of the underdogs, kind of constantly punching above our weight and thinking about, for example, a book that is represented by Kayla's agency just came out with My House this month. This book about craft, actually, if you're interested, it's called
I'll read
Craft in
it.
the Real World.
Everyone should buy this book.
So
Seriously.
good.
It's by Matthew Salesses, and essentially it talks about, you know, how we should really rework the workshop model. If any of you guys are in workshop at Vassar, you can see, especially for like folks who are queer or folks who are brown or Black, that it can be a very stifling environment. But anyway, all that to say, the book, you know, normal like a sort of esoteric book like that would not kind of be getting a big review in the New York Times, but our publicity team really, like, you know, pulled out our big guns and were like really kind of, you have such a, they again punch above their weight, and it's so cool to see. But again, you know, there's pros and cons to all of these kinds of differences. And Kayla will
like that's a book that sounds really cool that I could never pitch.
Yeah, and I think if anything, yeah, like Matt, and this is essentially I think what Jeff was getting to, and he kind of started this portion of the conversation, is who your publisher is really dependent on your needs as an author. And before I you guys might already know this, but like, so this is the book, the imprint. I don't know if you can see it. Nope, there's just the glare. You can't see it, but usually the imprint will be on the spine of the book. And so when we're talking about imprints, you see them everywhere. Sorry, I don't know why I thought that would be helpful. But yeah, so in terms of, I think that's one thing also that I learned, yes, very, very, or honestly, I'm still learning as an agent, is Big Five doesn't always necessarily mean better. And even though the connotation is, oh, Big Five, like you get a Big Five publisher, you get a cushy 6-figure advance. It really is about meeting the needs of the author, and that's one of your jobs as an agent. And also, which reminds me, I think we should talk about like money at some point, what various forms of money look like in terms of advances, how you make, you know, salary, if we're comfortable talking about that. But it may be like a situation where you're a debut author and it would be better for you to publish with an indie like Tin House, who has a very small team. They only put out 2 books a month, I want to say, but everybody at Tin House touches that book, and it really gets a lot of love and a lot of attention, and you don't have to worry about your book competing with the 10 other books that they're putting out that month. And for a debut, getting that extra attention can be great. So Kristen Arnett, Mostly Dead Things. I'm sorry, I'm plugging all these APL books, but you should also read that one. That published.
Yeah, we're here to plug our books.
I'm never going to take an opportunity to not plug a book. But she started out at Tin House, and it was a smaller team. But I really do think that care that she got is what put her on the bestseller list. And then for her second book, With Teeth, which is publishing with Riverhead, which is a part of that Big Five umbrella, it kind of gave her the springboard to reach to get that cushy 6-figure advance for her next book. So it really, there is a lot of, again, like when we're talking about writing as a business, that's what we're thinking and talking about in terms of, oh, there's the craft, but there's also hopefully an agent there to help you think about, you know, writing in terms of, okay, how do we position this book? You know, what is this doing for your brand as an author? You know, just things like that as well.
I want to ask like another just sort of survey of the students who here like would love to write a book one day. Cool. Okay, good to know. Who's thinking about journalism, working in a newsroom? You know, the Times, the New Yorker.
I see some like maybe.
Okay. All right.
Do we have more, you're all talking about writing novels, fiction, mostly, yes?
Novels, fiction.
Yes.
Who here wants to do nonfiction? Essays, criticism.
Hey.
All right.
Yeah, personal essays. Yeah,
I'm like that.
memoir. Yeah, again, like as we've all alluded to, there's so many ways to do this kind of writing and any kind of writing. So please you kind of have now a good survey of who we are and ask around.
Eric, how we doing?
We have a question.
Oh, yay.
Hear it?
Hi.
Maddie, a
Hi,
question?
Maddie.
Yeah, I did. So this has been super interesting and super fun, but I've also kind of been thinking about, especially with like the longer projects, like what kind of like motivates you like individually to kind of continue on with these projects? Because I know like they can get kind of like, I don't know, sometimes for me, the longer I work on something, the harder it is for me to work on it. So I was kind of saying, wanted to see like what kind of motivates you to continue with these like longer projects.
I'm gonna grab that one. So with my nonfiction books, money.
Yes.
Because usually with a book contract, you'll get half the money in advance, and then they hold the other half for when they accept the book. So you are highly motivated to finish the book. With fiction, which I've written 4 novels over my lifetime, one of which has been published, and those are purely driven by passion and the fun and the artistic reward of writing something, and not an easy task, and certainly not for everyone. But it's a cliche to say you do it because you have to do it. I mean, you don't really have to do it, but you just want to do it so much. And when I was writing my novel Mr. Wizard that did get published, I had probably the most satisfaction of anything that I ever wrote in my whole life. And I would go to bed at night and I couldn't wait for my alarm to go off in the morning so I could get back to work. And it was just, I had so much fun, and there was so much passion for me in the sitting down and writing, and I could put in a full day. I mean, writing for 2 or 3 hours is often a full day for anyone. And there were days where I wrote for 6 or 8 hours, and then I'd go have dinner and I'd be like, oh, I got to go downstairs. I got one more thing I got to put down. And so the motivations are depending on what the project is, and money's a great motivator too. But for me, the most fun I ever had writing was just, I'm doing this because I want to.
I'm gonna jump in here. I know maybe this is the place to end, and we can thank our mentors for a lively conversation, and students that appreciate your questions.